it was from the west coast of Africa, from states like Benin and Nigeria today, that slaves were enslaved by other Africans.
The main beneficiary of the slave trade was, of course, the UK and European countries.
Life expectancy is about 15 years higher in the Caribbean compared to West Africa, a direct benefit there.
Welcome back to Rattlesnake TV, guys. Today we got another video from our boy Rafe, the British historian that is thus far undefeated. This time, he's debating a woke activist about the idea that Britain should be paying reparations to countries that were historically affected by slavery. Now, just watch as this activist comes in with a little bit of a yawn argument, followed by Rafe absolutely walloping his argument in the face with some very uncomfortable facts. Check it out.
It's on that point that I want to ask about the practicalities of how this would work. Let's just assume that we do it, right? Let's just assume that Britain does it. Well, whatever percentage Rafe said there of our population currently residing in Britain, it was not British born. You'd also have a load of people who will be first and second generation, quite possibly from countries where they're saying that we owe reparations to. So who is paying this then?
So, I mean, firstly, I'm British born, but I am descendant of Nigerians. And if you compare how much wealth I have, or how much income I have, to people who live in Nigeria today, I make a significant, and by significant I mean tens or hundreds, or more than hundreds, more than them, because of the fact that I live in the UK, because the UK is the 6th richest country in the world, previously the 5th before Brexit. So the fact that the UK is wealthy benefits the people living in the UK now. And also, no one is saying that I, as a Nigerian, should personally put money in my pocket and give it in terms of reparations to a Caribbean. People are saying that the UK as an entity, which became rich by leading the slave trade and which has passed that wealth on to subsequent generations, because we all know about inheritance and we all know that wealth is inherited. I'm sure you're going to leave money to your children when you die. That some of that wealth should be returned, because the Caribbean today is largely poor, and of course, Africa itself. When a large portion of your workforce age, young, youthful population is stolen and taken away, your economy obviously takes a hit. If a large portion of young men in the United Kingdom was stolen from the country now, it would affect the future of the United Kingdom.
All right, Rafe, come back to that then.
Well, firstly, I would say, if as a Nigerian, if Britain is to pay reparations, then I think Femi as a Nigerian and other Nigerians should also pay reparations, because we have to remember it was from the west coast of Africa, from states like Benin and Nigeria today, that slaves were enslaved by other Africans. You know, there were as many slaves kept in bondage and slavery by Africans as were transported over the Atlantic. No white men were going inland and capturing slaves. They were purchasing slaves sold to them by the African chiefs of Western Africa. So if Britain is being asked to pay for slavery, then obviously people in Nigeria should also be paying for slavery. Also, you know, Femi has just said that the Caribbean is very poor. Actually, the Caribbean are middle-income countries, far wealthier than the West African countries from where the slaves first came. You know, the GDP per head in Benin, for example, is approximately $1,500 a year. You go to somewhere like Barbados, it's $14,000 a year. You know, Portugal, the biggest slave trader of all, is a poor country today. Slavery didn't benefit these European powers, as is often said. In this country, in the UK, slavery only contributed to about 3% of capital formation. The Caribbean states, it's impossible to tell me why the Caribbean states should be receiving any reparations money. You might make an argument for West Africa, but the Caribbean states have not been neglected or badly treated today. Sure, the slaves themselves have terrible lives, but the descendants of slaves living today in the Caribbean have a far better quality of life and a far longer life expectancy.
So this is not over yet, but obviously Rafe has already won, but let me just quickly add to this. Britain is currently being demolished by immigration from the third world that is literally changing the country's demographic and culture forever and beyond repair. The cost of living crisis is absolutely absurd all around, especially in places like the city of London. The housing crisis that's happening over there is absolutely absurd all around, especially in places like London. And the cost of living itself is also going up while wages are not necessarily doing the same thing. All the while, the taxpayer dollars are going to foreign wars and to looking after and housing immigrants. And then for these activists to then have the sheer audacity to say that Britain owes some sort of a debt to these African and Caribbean countries is outlandish. The British Empire abolished slavery, by the way, and they fought many battles and policed the seas for a very long time to make sure that nobody else was engaging in slavery, because African and Arabic empires were still engaging in it, as they still are today. Imagine being one of these activists and constantly slandering the country that has given you the prosperity that you enjoy today, telling them that they owe reparations to countries that were affected hundreds of years ago, whilst there are still millions of people that are enslaved today. I mean, they could focus on that, but that's more complicated, because if they focused on that, then that requires a little bit more than sitting around talking about it and virtue signaling. And it doesn't get much better for our boy Femi in this next clip. But guys, before we get there, don't forget to smash that like button if you're genuinely enjoying this video, and subscribe to the channel. Let's get to it.
Okay, all right, I'll let Femi come back. So, Femi, how do you respond to that claim there that Africans and descendants of Africans should also be paying reparations for the other Africans that they enslaved?
I mean, I don't know how much Rafi knows about Africa, but of course I think that within Nigeria, there's conversations to be had about particular traditional leaders, etc., and parts of the country that have wealth. I mean, any country where one part has exploited another part, there should be some kind of retributory justice going on. And I wouldn't be opposed to certain people who have enriched themselves within Africa of these actions having to pay something. No one's saying that's not the thing. But the main beneficiary of the slave trade, of course, was what? Can I just finish? The main beneficiary of the slave trade was, of course, the UK and European countries. Also, when you look at the actual economics of countries like the Caribbean, yes, countries in the Caribbean tend to be wealthier than countries in Africa. However, when you talk about $14,000, we have to remember this is one purchase parity adjusted, which means when you talk about $14,000, that isn't $14,000. That's what you could buy. How much money you'd need in the local currency to be able to buy $14,000 worth of bread or of this or of the other. So in terms of actual currency exchange, that isn't $14,000. And also, when you look at Barbados, for example, a lot of the wealth of Barbados is very, very, very concentrated in some of the tax exiles and very wealthy people who have emigrated to Barbados to benefit from the tax scheme there. The actual native population of Barbados are relatively poor compared to Western countries, including Portugal.
All right, Rafe, come on.
Yeah, well, every single country in the Caribbean has a higher GDP than West African nations. Let's use another measure. Every former British colony in the Caribbean has a higher quality of life and ranked higher on the UN's Human Development Index than all of the rest of South America, all of the Spanish and Portuguese colonies. And of course, Femi hasn't addressed life expectancy. Life expectancy is about 15 years higher in the Caribbean compared to West Africa, a direct benefit there. Look, if we were having this discussion about reparations in 1807 or 1833, when we led the world in abolishing slavery, of course I would be in favor of it, because the people then were alive. But as Bayard Rustin, the great socialist in America, said, and this was a man who was given the Presidential Medal of Freedom posthumously by Barack Obama, he said, if my great-grandfather picked cotton for 50 years, he may deserve some reparations. But I didn't pick cotton, and nobody owes me anything.
Such a good quote there, and so true. If you hold on to the oppression of your ancestors, you actually insult them because you did not suffer anything that they suffered. And when you really think about it, it just goes to highlight the ridiculous nature of these reparations claims. Nobody who suffered through the slavery that you're talking about is still alive today. And nobody that perpetrated the slavery is still alive. And it's not like these practices haven't affected history, and there aren't people alive today who haven't felt the ripple effects of that. Absolutely there are. But that's just the nature of history. That's the story of people and civilizations. And if you think about it like this, then literally everybody has a claim to historical oppression. Just look at your family tree, and I guarantee you'll be able to find somebody who is either displaced or enslaved or murdered. And when you do find that person, what you can do is you can go see who committed that atrocity against them. You can have a look at their family tree, find their ancestors, and go and knock on their door and shake them down for some cash. You see how ridiculous it is to be looking back in the rearview mirror like this? There is no end to how complicated that scenario is. And also, we've got a lot on our plate in the modern world. So guys, that's it from me. So as usual, hit those links below, subscribe to the channel. If you'd like to watch another video, right here. Till next time, I'm Jake. This is RattlesnakeTV, keeping you armed and dangerous.